righty. Good evening. Welcome back once again to One Step Beyond. Once again, let's sacrifice a Tootsie Roll at the altar of the gods of technology and hope they smile upon us. And, good evening, Walter. Can you hear me?
Good evening, Dave.
Well, welcome to the KFJC airwaves. We are speaking... Whoops. Get our tape running here. We're speaking with Walter Bowart, the author of Operation Mind Control. Actually, is it safe at this point to call it Part 1?
Well, no, it's totally revised and expanded. What was it, 17 years ago? I wrote the first edition of it, and I made a few errors. One of them was we had the Manchurian Candidate before the end of World War II, and I made the assumption, as did others, that they were still looking for it. And, of course, the CIA documents led us along and made us believe they hadn't found it, and this was all experimental. But, in fact, they were operational then. So that was one of the major errors in the beginning of the book. Richard Condon, who wrote The Manchurian Candidate, wrote the introduction to my book, and I've left that the same. But otherwise, I explained that, in fact, art didn't imitate, well, art did imitate life. Life didn't imitate art, as I thought it had, but art did imitate life. That Condon's Manchurian Candidate was a kind of a watered-down version of what really actually had already been accomplished.
Now, of course, the Manchurian Candidate being a mind-controlled assassin.
Right, yeah, he was, if you can rent the video now, it's out. Frank Sinatra bought it and kept it off the market for a number of years. They were set up to assassinate the President of the United States after being captured in Korea and programmed by the insidious Fu Manchu evil North Koreans, supposedly, and it was supposed to be this advanced technology of hypnosis, pain drug hypnosis, and all the stuff that we know about now. I don't think the Chinese, they might have it, but the leader in the world is the United States as far as mind control goes.
One of the ironies about the mind control programs is that real or imagined or exaggerated Soviet and or Chinese communist quote, brainwashing, unquote, was the rationale for the research into this field.
Well, it was. I mean, that's what we were told.
Right.
That's what the CIA documents showed us. But in fact, when we go back into the files and the archives and dig a little deeper, and we've had now almost 20 years to do that, we find that one case came, a very interesting published case, open files. A naval officer had been working behind the enemy lines, and it seemed as though it was even before the war with Japan broke out. At some point, he was an intelligence guy. He had been captured by the Japanese. He had tortured. He was tortured. He had done torturing. There was a lot of atrocities, a lot of things that would have given him post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And he lived a beautiful life after the war. He got out of the military in 1947. He got a pension, and he had VA hospital. He had good care. He married. He had a normal life, but he couldn't remember anything that he'd done. Mm-hmm. Well, then he was in his 80s, and this was only a few years ago. He had cardiovascular accidents or a stroke, and he began to remember everything. And he went through the post-traumatic. His last days were hell, because he not only had the strokes and everything, the inability to speak, and all the things that come with those CVAs, but he had the memory of the terror that was suppressed for all those years. So there's a case that he might not have been a hypno-programmed assassin, but at least his memories were suppressed by a very well-working amnesia, which now is, of course, there's a variety of different techniques that can induce amnesia, including some that are using highly sophisticated frequencies of electromagnetic spectrum, which actually boil certain cells in your brain.
Walter, in the new edition of Operation Mind Control that you're working on now, you update mind control technology from the mid-1970s, and Operation Mind Control, the edition of Operation Mind Control that my listeners are familiar with through accessing your work on the air, came out in 77, as I recall.
Yeah, well, I think it was released in January of 78. It was finished. I had finished it in 1977. The bulk of the research was in 75. Yes, it was severely, it was dated, but it's historically correct. Most of the work in there is historically correct, and I've left that in there, which is only, well, it's less than half of the book now, because the book is like a phone book. It's a voluminous thing, which I've also included a lot of the interviews, the kind of interviews that I didn't include before, that were redundant and whatever, because we learned about, if people are readers of the first volume, I opened with a man named David, who at the time I didn't know how you would diagnose his problem, or what you would call it. I was thinking, well, maybe this is schizophrenia, or what did they induce by this pain drug hypnosis, multiple personality, you know. It was, but I didn't know what you called that. I mean, I believe in those days, about 1980, I think there were 25 cases of multiple personality diagnosed in the United States. Now there's tens of thousands of cases. And I recently talked to the leading MPD. It's now called, just last year, they changed it to dissociative identity disorder, just to make things more confused. But I talked to the leading...
Or DIA for short, huh?
DID.
DID, okay.
Did, and I talked to Colin Ross, who's a doctor down at Charter Hospital in Dallas, and he's a Canadian, and he gets a lot of patients sent from all over the world because it's a specialized hospital in that kind of treatment. And I said, how many people that you see are military, to have intelligence or military backgrounds? He says, about 20%, and that's far too high. And then we got to talk, he was talking to another friend of mine, and they were kicking around how many people, he's thoroughly convinced that there's mind control, that you can, what we found out is they would go back, old German families, there would be 5, 6, 7 generations, now maybe more. This may go back to the Middle Ages, this kind of programming where you take a baby, an infant, and you dip it in scalding water, half of it, and then you turn the other half over and dip it in cold water. Well, it makes you dissociated from the time you're 6 months old, right? So you develop a dissociated identity, or many identities, multiple personality in effect, and then the intelligence, then the daddy comes along and sells the kid to the intelligence people.
Walter, a couple of things that just interjecting briefly. What we're talking about here is the deliberate abuse of very young children in order to cause what a psychologist would refer to as a split in the ego. The ego, literally, not one's pride or self-esteem, which is actually a misuse of the term, but the actual organizational function, the abstract organizational function of the personality actually divides, so that the personality becomes multiple, and the pain and the horror and the suffering of this ritual torture is experienced by one part of the personality but not the other. It's actually a self-defense mechanism, on the psychological self-defense mechanism.
Yes.
In the first edition of Operation Mind Control, you discussed the manipulation of individuals who had multiple personalities. For example, Candy Jones.
Well, yes, but we didn't identify that either. She was just like David. Well, now we have tens of thousands of people like this. They all went to work for the United States government. They were all multiple personalities. Now, Candy Jones is the case, as was David, I later learned recently, is the case who was an abused child. And from David's case, he told me then, but I didn't understand it all completely, that he had been an abused child by his father, and they gave him Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Index test and the various things in school that we all got. But they could, an MMPI test, you can see who's a multiple. And there are different tests you can tell who's a multiple. If you're already a multiple, boy, Uncle Sam wants you, because then you can be a spy. You can carry secret messages locked behind post-hypnotic blocks. You can even be an assassin like Sirhan and not remember it.
Uncle Sam wants all of you, so to speak.
All of you, yeah. And so that's why we were talking to Ross, and we were kicking around this idea. And others it's just a speculation, of course, but the estimation of how many people were involved in this has gone up to 3 million people in the United States have been used, and most of them are government and military-related people. So I've told some of these stories. I mean, it breaks your heart heart when you hear a woman now 48 years old tell about her childhood where her mother and father were both in naval intelligence. They were heroes that broke the Japanese code during World War II, worked on that team, but the mother would deliver the child to serve her country as a multiple personality spy as a little child, even on up through teenage years and even to present time.
This, in some ways, I think could be viewed as a mind control analog to the youth groups that various totalitarian governments have used, the Hitler Youth and youth groups that have been developed in the Soviet Union and other totalitarian powers, except that this would involve mind control and the actual restructuring of the unconscious aspects of the human personality in such a way as to remove all volition from the individual. You mentioned, Walter, that apparently in some German families this had been going on.
This is very cool. We've traced it, yes. And then anybody that deals with this ritual abuse or this kind of thing will tell you that it's been a common thing in a variety of cultures, but one of them would be the German culture. And this goes back, and certainly the Nazis had forms of this, and any number of them did. And people knew about in Africa. It's still going on in Botswana. It's called the Tokolashis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's been written about, and it's very much like what Condon wrote about in the introduction of my book. You take somebody and deform them, and in this case, you deform. When you traumatize somebody, again, it's pain and terror. It's all fear-based. When you traumatize a child or give them so much pain, they will disassociate. They will leave their body. They will have an out-of-body experience, and then they will adapt an identity to survive. And if you haven't seen Sybil and you want to know more about this, see the movie Sybil. But this is all obsolete. Now we have subatomic particle ways of doing this. We have ways of doing it by remote control so that the victims will never meet their handlers. The flaw in that old system is that they could identify their handlers, and many of them have been doing that just now. Word was, the recently we got, was that there was a pardon that had gone down for all the handlers, and that these people were, instead of being killed with their secrets, they were being released from service, so to speak. And but they're just unraveling there are so many multiples running around. And unless a person has ever confronted one of these people, one has no idea of what I'm talking about. And of course, now comes along the intelligence operation called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, who would obfuscate and try to blur these realities and this truth that's coming out.
So what we're talking about here, Walter, backtracking for just a minute, is the actual creation of a substratum of American society of multiple personalities, children that had been deliberately strategically abused in order to form multiple personalities and then placed in the service of the national security establishment.
Their fathers were contacted. There would be guys. This would be going on in the family for years, and their fathers and the mothers would abuse the whole family. But 80% of them are women, right? Mm-hmm. And then they would go to an Air Force base somewhere, be taken in, and the military guys or the intelligence guys would show them exactly how it's done. And we still have that operating along with. It's also, we find that they recruited from satanic groups. And all sorts of ritual all sorts of cults, pagan cults of one kind or another. Anybody that had a blood ritual, any group that had something like that even appeared, even if you slaughtered animals, you could traumatize a child and they could dissociate, or if you torture them in some way. So any kind of thing like that, the military and the intelligence people were looking for that, and they would fund these satanic groups and they would fund these pagan cult groups, and infiltrate them and do just what they did with COINTELPRO, but on a much more insidious thing, whereby some of these ritual sacrifices and blood rituals and stuff would take place on military bases,
I did a series back in 1987 called The Ultimate Evil, subtitled Satanism, Mind Control in the U.S. National
I listened to that, and I want to compliment you on the air for the job that you've done and for this radio show and this program and your tape series. I want to pat you on the back and say, well done.
Well, one of my major sources in terms of the actual hard information, as well as an inspirational source, was, of course, yours truly. Was you, Walter, I should say.
Yes.
I took a lot of heat for that series on Satanism and mind control in the U.S. national security establishment. Yeah. X number of people would titter about such things. It would now appear from the research that you've done that not only was that stuff not, way out, crazy, wacky, but that it is far more prevalent than one might suspect.
Right. Yes, it is. And the things are coming up. We're getting together with a lot of, people that work in the field of professionals, and we're hearing stories about Nazi doctors who were programming. They're probably, most of them are almost dead now, the Nazi doctors, but they've turned it over to others. All the Nazis that were led into the United States after World War II in violation of our laws and international law were put to work by the intelligence people, and one of these guys was apparently he was formerly a Hasidim Jew, I think, that had been traumatized by Mengele, was under Mengele's control. He was a young man when he got to the United States. It was very easy for him to get in, being a Jew and being looking like a victim of the Nazis. He then was sent to medical school, got a medical degree, and went to work for the intelligence community and became the author or the creator of the most insidious, multi-layered program, whereby in order to get to the core of the individual, you have to deal with all these alters surrounding it. Well, most of the therapists don't know a damn thing about this, and they get all stuck in the alters. Well, the more you deal with the content, instead of doing the process that works, that gets to the core of the situation, you're never going to get anywhere. So you have to do it in a certain way, and there's all these little booby traps laid in there, and it's a very interesting, very absolutely fascinating but terrifying thing to realize about how vulnerable we all are, because this has all it's snowballed over the last 50 years, I guess. It's snowballed to where now, you can see these embedded commands in advertising, on television, in movies. You have a movie that you can rent in your video store called Trancers 2. I think its production company is called Alter Productions. There are people out there that know about this and have known about this a lot longer than you and I, who are doing this. And a number of they're called survivors. I made the mistake of calling them victims, but they're liberating themselves, and they're survivors of mind control. The survivors are telling their counselors and therapists and deprogrammers. We like to use the word deprogrammers because that's what it is. We can get into all the technicalities if you want, but they're telling them in a certain time in the future, they're all programmed. These kids were trained as little children to make bombs, nuclear weapons, how to, shoot, all sorts of, military and intelligence kind of thing. And they're programmed in 1998, I think it was July 6, 1998, multiples of numerology, 666 times 3, to go off and, who knows what? Maybe it's going to be a lot of McDonald's shooting type things, or maybe there'll be some, terrorism here or there for some purpose unknown only to the programmers. And it's been going on for so long. There's so many people talking about it, and that now we're beginning to get the codes, cues, and triggers that trigger all this stuff.
By the way, the term alter, Walter, we're talking about basically other personalities, in effect, sort of like cul-de-sac personalities,
right,
that are not the true personality at which is at the core of this phenomenon.
Right, alter egos, I guess maybe people would call them. But the government learned, and whereas he would talk about 20 or 30 in the old days, you talk about 20 or 30 different personalities. The government had a way to develop their intelligence people, a cryptocracy, I like to call it, because it's so vast. It developed a system whereby it would shatter and fragment these personalities. So if you had 30, you would have 30,000 of them, each with its own separate code, cue, trigger. You'd call on the phone, you give a tone, and like George DeMoran show, put a gun to his head and pull the trigger. His daughter believes that he was programmed that way. And there are a number of people, you call them, you say, nose rose, and out comes, personality. How about Daisy? Anybody out there that responds to Daisy? give Dave Emery a call at the radio station.
But just that, a phone call, not a live visit. The interesting thing is, Walter, before we get back to some of the other things that are in, now, what is the actual title of this new edition?
I'm calling it an Operation Mind Control Revised and Expanded Edition, and have a subtitle, which let me see here, I can find it somewhere. I haven't looked at it since a long time. It's about how the cryptocracy wants to psycho-civilize you.
And this is an expanded researcher's edition of Operation Mind Control.
Yeah, this is a limited edition to 500 copies. And I'm hoping that the people, it's expensive, and I'm hoping that the people that buy it will be the serious people, and they will want to give me feedback and criticize and add to, and because we have so much information and we have so much anecdotal information, and that's what we're after, because we're trying to piece together all the parts of this puzzle with the codes, cues, and triggers intact, so that we can then begin to do some real work and turn it over to the people that do this, that do the therapy. As a matter of fact, we've even gone one step further, and we've gotten people that are defectors from the intelligence, the programmers, and they're working now for the first time in our history with the psychotherapists and psychologists who are learning how to deprogram, because without the codes, cues, and triggers, it takes forever. And with the codes, cues, and triggers, you can do it in no time at all, without even dealing with any of the content and without a lot of abreaction. I mean, the thing you don't want to do is to take a human being and put them through the terror all over again, you know?
You were talking about some of the people that had been involved on behalf of the intelligence community, in effect, rolling over or crossing lines and working to do some deprogramming. This brings me, Walter, to something that I was very gratified to see, and that I think members of the listening audience will be gratified to know about. As a talk show host I'm in my 16th year on the air, and as someone that has had a fair amount of discussion of mind control on the air, and that I've done, obviously, a series of archive shows featuring, among other works, Operation Mind Control Part 1 very prominently. I've had a lot of calls over the years from people who either know someone that they feel is under mind control, or people themselves who feel they're under mind control, basically. And this has been a very anguishing experience for yours truly. They asked me, what can I do? What kind of help can you give me? And beyond recommending some reading material and a few rudimentary, tiny baby steps they could take towards some kind of therapy, it's left me completely helpless.
Yeah, it's
indeed, there was a woman who was being subjected apparently to some of what I call cordless mind control, the use of electromagnetic radiation and microwaves to torture her in a number of ways. Right. And she was seeing a psychiatrist. And she asked the psychiatrist, what could she do? Who could she turn to? Right. And the psychiatrist said, well, the only two people I know that could help you are Mae Brussell, the late Mae Brussell, a dear friend and colleague, and Dave Emery, which I think in many ways points up, it highlights the gravity of the situation and the utter failure, at least for the time being, of our society to even recognize, let alone deal effectively with this massive problem. You have now formed, in cooperation with some other people, the Freedom of Thought Foundation, Walter. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes. After living with this like you have for so many years, I'm frustrated too, and I wanted to get to this. I wanted to give these people help. Something's going on. They're not crazy. They're not alone. There are a lot of them. And then I turned to the psychiatric community. Most of the psychiatrists don't know anything about this. The only ones that can help in that community are the people who are trained with Ericksonian techniques, and there's not enough of them, and very few. And so it's just beginning to dawn now in the psychiatric community. Colin Ross said that this will probably occupy the psychiatric community for the next 10 years and take up all the resources that are available. Tragically, so many people have entirely wasted their funds because a lot of this programming manifests as psychosomatic illness. So they would go to a surgeon and have their whatever taken out, or whatever. And also, a lot of these people that were guinea pigs for the government were given radiation. We found a lot of grays disease that affects the thyroid, you know. So a lot of them have a missing thyroid, and the question now arises with the recent revelations on the atomic energy or Department of Energy stuff, the 3 million documents that were released. We realized that children were given radiation for experimental purposes, and these children are now 48 years old, and they're also the mind control victims, some of them too. So it's a very interesting thing. I wanted to do something about it, so I got together with some others and a lot more. I've just gotten a couple of people. John McGuffin in San Francisco. He's an attorney, but he's also the author of The Guinea Pig, Human Guinea Pigs, and he's an Irishman. He wrote about the British treatment of the Irish with these sophisticated technologies that affect the mind. I've also gotten L. Fletcher Prouty to allow us to put his name on the masthead, and he was the chief, he's the Mr. X in the JFK movie. He was the first chief of operations for the CIA.
He was in charge of special operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time that President Kennedy was killed.
That's right.
And the author of the book, The Secret Team.
That's right, and a great, real American patriot. And though his area of expertise is not necessarily mind control, he certainly knows the intelligence business and all the nonsense involved there, you know. So he's a great assist to us. And there are others that don't want their name, a lot of others that don't want their names used, especially it seems like that the people, the doctors, the psychiatrists, psychologists are very vulnerable. They can be sued by the patients. They have the medical associations. They have all of these laws and burdens on them. So, and they're also under attack by this group called the False Memory Syndrome. I call it the False Memory Spindrome Foundation because it's a phony group. There's no such syndrome as false memory. And the people on the board are like Martin Orr, MK Ultra doctors. Jolly and West is going to make the speech in December to their national conference, et cetera, et cetera.
Himself a veteran of the LSD and mind control research programs of the CIA. Also Jack Ruby's personal psychiatrist.
That's right. And didn't he work with one of the other guys too? He was also at Waco, advising on the psychological warfare operations that were done down there on the Branch Davidian thing. Anyway, so it's pretty much a highly visible intel operation. And the interesting thing about their argument is that they're saying that people's memories, if they remember stuff 10 or 12 years later, and the nature of this kind of compartmentalization, the multiple personality stuff, is to have amnesia and to have it suppressed for a number of years. And then when your handler dies, or you have a child, if you're a female, things begin to shake loose and you begin to put yourself together again, and you see these multiples start coming out. And I've interviewed a number of these people. It's like a riot in a schoolhouse. These fragmented personalities are all fighting to get out, you know, and they're all tortured children. Well, you can't tell me that these people are making this up and this is false, right? But that's what they would do. That's what the False Memory Syndrome Foundation would do. And then they would blame the therapist for implanting those memories in their minds, which, you know, if they can make that work, you know what that means? That means we got no legal system. That means that you can't trust your memory. You can't trust any witness's memory. So goodbye to your memory. And what are you going to do? If you don't have a video camera of the incident, then you can't show it in court because no memory is... But this doesn't hold water. And people like Elizabeth Loftus on their board, I hear she's a well-intentioned person, but she doesn't know her from a hole in the ground, because anybody that talks to me about memory better talk to me the way the Mega Memories guy talks to you, and he can teach you how to remember everything, and it's all about second signal system reinforcement. And if you don't talk about the various signals in the mind, you don't know anything you're talking about. This lady Loftus is talking about stuff that occurred in 1916, you know. So, and then plus the people that are the head of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation are pedophiles, and even the founder of it was declared by her daughter, Freyd, J.J. Freyd, is a psychologist. Her mother's a sociologist who founded this group with lots of support, millions of dollars, you know, just money running out their ears quickly. J.J. said, I didn't want to say this in public, but my mother's forced me to do it. I was an abused child by my mother and father, Peter Freyd. And she said it publicly and you know, talked about her abuse, which is which is shows you where it's at with these people. But they're doing a great deal of destruction to our society, and one wonders about the legal system. Where are these judges and these lawyers that become judges? Where are they being educated? There's a big educational. Alan Shefflin, who's a lawyer up your way, has written a book on trans. He's at Santa Clara College.
I think he's at the University of Santa Clara University.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Mind Manipulators.
Yes, but after that he wrote one, Trance on Trial. And he's a lawyer, so he's in the legal aspect of it very big. And he's convinced that this is an intel operation. And of course, I don't think that he necessarily. He's also a psychologist, and he's learned some hypnosis, so he has some background to this. But I don't think he really understands the impact, or he's playing it so close to the chest, and he's so conservative that he is misplaying the information that he's got in his hands, which is what he did before in The Mind Manipulators, which came out after my book. I spent 2 weeks with him, giving him all my information. He came out with the crucial point wrong, which was, these are just experiments. We don't have any operations. I was convinced in 1975 that it was operational.
Oh, it's operational. People that, of course, I live and work in the Santa Clara Valley, the much ballyhooed Silicon Valley, or as I call it, the Valley of the Shadow of Death, because it's the epicenter of the defense electronics industry, as well as the electronics industry, period.
Right.
It's national security up here, big time.
Yeah.
And mind control is not only a reality, but it has been prevalent for a long time. From a philosophical standpoint, Walter, the issue of mind control is, at one level, interesting, and at another, terrifying in a gigantic way.
The last vestige of privacy is your mind.
The ability, tyrants have always sought to deceive or coerce the human will, either through misinformation or through propaganda or threats or even torture. Or, and the last way, perhaps, of coercing the will is to kill someone. But with mind control, a threshold has been crossed with regard to human activity and human civilization in which the human will can be completely subverted. The human capacity to decide right and wrong and to consequently govern one's behavior accordingly has been absolutely, or can be totally bypassed, which is an enormous step for the human race. You brought up something that I found very intriguing also, that with the conceptual subversion of memory, with the capacity to simply call into question the validity of memory, not only our legal system, Walter, but perhaps even our very understanding of history, our entire viewpoint, our worldview, could be called into question.
Well, we can get off, and we've done this at the Freedom of Thought Foundation. One of our founding principles is to do everything we can to repeal the National Security Act. You remember the Volstead Act said that our parents couldn't drink anything, right? Well, they lived under that for a number of years, and all it did is create gangsterism. Well, we've done the same thing. Good old President Truman didn't mean to do it, and he made statements after he got out of office saying that it was the worst mistake he ever made, but he allowed the National Security Act to be passed, and that set up a secret... 1/3 of our budget of our government is in this secret funds, and now we got drug business, and we got the government dealing drugs, and we got all these problems of modern society. It's just totally collapsed because of the National Security Act. I say we have a national security state, and all the secrets, all the golden age, all the high technology that's going to bail us out from this mess is hidden behind the national security curtain that we've got to raise by repealing on state-by-state basis the National Security Act. So I'd be very interested in hearing from people that want to be local chapter members of the Freedom of Thought Foundation. And we've talked at length about that, because the biggest lie we're living under is the fact that we're living in a state of national emergency when all of our civil rights, the Bill of Rights, is suspended. This law says, in the interest of national security, all your rights get... Well, what is national security? Nobody's ever defined it. There's no case law on it,
There's an interesting...
Catch-22,
Exactly. It is said that in a country without memory, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And we are approaching such a state at a number of different levels, both collectively and historically, and also individually and psychologically.
Yeah. Now, as Goethe said, danger fosters a rescuing power. So what's happening is, whenever something becomes obsolete, let's say an environment, a technology, or whatever. Let's talk about the air in your room. I mean, if it's too hot, you notice it, you go over and you take control of the thermostat and turn it down. If it's too cold, you turn it up. So let's think of the air in the room as the environment, or as a technology. It's created by a technology. It's obsolete the moment you notice it, and then you do something about it, and then you handle it, which makes it an artifact, which makes it an art form, right? So the postmodern condition, we're extending our senses at the speed of light through the electronic medium, right? The body has become obsolete. Thus, we have breast implants, liposuction, tattooing, piercing, people with green hair and weird clothes, and all the stuff you can do to the body because it's an art form, because it's obsolete. Same thing with secrecy. When information travels at the speed of light, there is no secrecy. Therefore, you're having all this cryptocracy raising its ugly head everywhere and trying to do the clipper ship, and a 21-year-old guy defeats that, and then Whitfield Diffie, God bless him, and may he be on a coin in America someday as a great national hero, invents the pretty good program which gives the people the right to encrypt their own stuff and keep the government out of their hair.
One of the things that I tell my audience constantly, Walter, and I deal with an awful lot of really grim stuff, and frankly, it can be very defeating from a psychological standpoint. But you've touched on something that I think is critical to understand, however bleak things may be and however bleak they may be threatening to become, which is pretty goddamn bleak. At the same time, there is an expansion in the human capacity to acquire, assimilate, and disseminate, the last one perhaps being the most important, information that is unprecedented. Computers, with what they offer, are remarkable things. But beyond that, even the relatively primitive technology that you and I are using right now, talk radio, is a great way of communicating information. People can call up talk shows, and even Gordon Liddy or Mr. Mount Limbaugh can be utilized to get in a quick hit, and I mean that informationally, not literally. The cassette recorder, something that I've utilized for my archive shows, and that I've used to help disseminate information from Operation Mind Control Volume 1, is a tremendous tool, so that as horrible as the mind control programs are, and as enormous as they have become, both operationally and from a conceptual standpoint, at the same time, I think the information technology that is available to us offers a very real, a very viable possibility for counteracting the totalitarian effects of these various realities.
Well, every technology is neutral, and it has a beneficial application as well as detrimental application. And right now, it seems like the military has made a lot of breakthroughs, and a lot of the new technology through history that we've gotten has been because of war. But then it's trickled down applied to everybody, and it turns out to be beneficial. And it's happened in medicine, and it's happened in all sorts of ways. Thanks to war, we have many breakthroughs. Now we're into a weird situation, and I refer the listeners to a book called The Report from Iron Mountain, if they can find it. And in that report was supposed to come out in 1960, I think, 7. And one believes that it was a leak from the, what was it called, the Hudson Institute, Herman Kahn, that group. I asked Prouty about it, and he said that he was told by Lewin that it was a hoax, right? But it wasn't, there was a satire, and Paul Krasner told me the same thing, it was a satire, but nobody's laughing because it was the thing that McGeorge Bundy and all those Harvard think tankers at the time were talking about. What do we do in time of peace?
Right, and I should point out that the report from Iron Mountain has been derided by people who seek to discredit this type of research. It is not, in fact, an actual Hudson Institute document, but it is something which carries a great deal of weight because it is satire in the most traditional sense. Satire was used as a vehicle for the illumination of reality.
Yeah, but usually you laughed at it. And knew it was tongue-in-cheek. And this thing, Prouty says, this is exactly what they were saying.
Yes,
so
exactly.
This guy just wrote it down in his own terms.
Right, but political satire in its ideal form is using the art to illuminate life.
Right, and that's what this is, but it says, here's what we're going to do to make... in a time of peace, when peace comes. And now we've got the Cold War over, we got a time of peace, and so they say, what are we going to do? Here are the functions. Here's what we can do. Economic, a comprehensive social welfare program directed toward maximum improvement of general conditions of human life, that'd be expected. B, a giant open-end space research program aimed at unreachable targets, a permanent ritualized ultra-elaborate disarmament inspection system and variants of such a system. Then 2, political. An omnipresent, virtually omnipotent international police force. And B, an established and recognized extraterrestrial menace. C, massive global environmental pollution. D, fictitious alternate enemies. And then it goes on. I mean, this has come true.
Yep, but to a large extent it really has.
And then we begin to look into the numbers of. They don't even want to talk about it. The deprogrammers don't want them to talk about it. Their psychotherapists don't want them to talk about it. But it's there. They're just not talking about it. And that is so-called alien programming, right? And it involves the phony alien abductions. And it involves all the stuff you've seen. We have a chart in the back of Operation Mind Control that's coming along. Registered owners of the book will receive appendixes and be updated. But right now we're preparing a chart, or several charts that compare ritual abuse, alien abduction abuse, and mind control. And they're really the same.
I've given lectures and also talked on the air about my suspicion that, and I think there's considerable evidence that this is the case, that UFOs are real, but that they're not, the ET is the myth. There are real circular flying machines in the Earth's atmosphere, and then they were not developed on Mars or someplace else. They were developed right here, but that ET is a result of the use of mind control and perhaps more simpler propaganda techniques to mask this.
Well, I wouldn't even rule out the ET. I would love to believe that the ETs are there behind it all, running these cryptocrats. You know, I'd love that'd be a saving grace, but that's not the scope of my inquiry. All we do know is that the United States cryptocracy has been involved in the ET extraterrestrial UFO thing, including the phony hearings that it's had, the Blue Book thing, the Robertson report. The Robertson report in the 50s was a CIA study of UFOs, and it said that the UFO itself, the technology was no threat, but the people's belief in it was a threat. You know, and it could be used. And then we have a document, we have a declassified document that shows that one of the generals says, Walter Smith, I think, said, I'm today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal, Tab A, which is missing, of course, in which it is concluded that the problems connected with unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare as well as for intelligence and operations. The background for this view is presented in some detail in Tab B. And it's now, in 1952, 40 years later, they're still not giving us Tab A and Tab B, you know.
The interesting thing is that the actual origins of the ET myth begin in the immediate post-World War II period, even before the first post-World War II UFO sightings. And so many of the people involved in these either had connections with the national security establishment and or fascist groups such as the I Am movement, the residua of the William Dudley Pelley organization, and so forth.
Right.
And that a lot of these ETs were tall with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Yeah, that was the beginning. Then they turned into lizards. And also, the experiences followed the technology. Now it's all Babylon 5 stuff, you know. Back in the 40s, it was like pretty simple technology, you know. And so it never outpaced the ability of Hollywood to come come up with special effects.
In addition to the multiple personality disorders and the deliberate manipulation of same on a scale, frankly, Walter, which I had not even suspected.
Yeah.
You also are going to be going into, in the new expanded Operation Mind Control, some of the, what I call cordless mind control, the use of microwaves and other forms of electromagnetic radiation, a phenomenon that I've previously discussed in connection with the research of people like Harlan Gerard.
Yes. Harlan's been contributing a lot to my research. The difference now between now and when I was doing it in 1975 is now there's a network of researchers all over the world. And the network is facilitated in large part through electronic computer, email and what have you. Mm-hmm. So it's like a whole different thing. We can get feedback quicker, we can put things out, we can communicate in ways that we didn't have available to us in those days. And people like Harlan Gerard, I think he's also a victim or a survivor. He's still targeted. I call him EM targeted rather than wavy. We've called it a thing, we call it the mental telepathy system. Gerard has identified it as a telepresence phenomenon. We came up with 2 or 3 different patents that describe how you can use it on animals, different aspects of it. There's a variety of it. I've even interviewed a guy in New Mexico that'll sell you the equipment to do it to your mother-in-law, or sell you the equipment that you can, for about $12,000, where you can defend yourself from all invasions of the electromagnetic spectrum. And I said to him, could a person that's a convicted felon buy one of these things, even though they couldn't buy a gun? He says, well, I don't want you to tell me that, because I wouldn't sell it to you. But if you didn't tell me I'd sell it to you, it's not regulated, So I call it invisible warfare. So I called him up and I said, let's talk about mind control. Can a person have voices inside their head and he said, a lot more than that. We can have them jumping through hoops and stuff. People, victims of this stuff, or survivors of this thing, are talking about acoustical weaponry, where they actually feel like they're kicked in things. And one man we interviewed, we're doing a documentary on this, and we interviewed a number of people on videotape. And it'll be about a year before that comes.
When you say they feel they're kicked, they are actually
physically, like in the solar plane, stomach or something, knocked to the ground.
But this as a result of being subjected to electromagnetic radiation, not actually physically touched.
In this case, we think it's acoustical.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all a variety of stuff from the electromagnetic weaponry, and you can read a lot about it. And there's a Wall Street Journal article about they call it non-lethal weaponry,
which is a euphemism if ever there was one.
Yeah. Now I want to point out to the listeners also that all this so-called non-lethal weaponry, which we have a Department of Justice document stating clearly in 1993 that it is intended to be used against American people. This is a violation of all your constitutional rights and falls under the same thing as poison gas would fall under in the Nuremberg and those codes.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you're the target. And especially I'm very concerned about the people who work for the government. They are the number one target. And that's the reason that we're finding out so much so fast, because people are just tired of it. They know that their government has turned against them.
Well, Walter, this might be a good juncture because we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
People that are interested in obtaining the Researchers Edition, the new expanded edition of Operation Mind Control, which, by the way, they will also be sanctioned to, under certain circumstances, to copy and give to other people or sell to other people.
Well, yeah, I'm just, if they will send me the name and address of the person that's going to get the copy, I will send them a title page, which is signed and embossed, and they can take it down to the Xerox shop with the letter that I'll give them, and the guy will run as many as they want, and I'm charging $15 a piece.
Okay, we can't actually mention prices on the air, but
leave that out.
For who or where should they write now to get a hold of the?
To find out more about it, please write Freedom of Thought Foundation.
Okay.
P.O. Box 35072.
Right.
Tucson, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
85740-5072.
Okay, now this is both for people who would like to get the Researchers Edition of Operation Mind Control and or people who would like to contact and or join Freedom of Thought Foundation.
Right.
Once again, that's the national headquarters for the Freedom of Thought Foundation, P.O. Box 35072, Tucson, Arizona, zip code 85740. 840-5072. And do you still have the same email address?
Yeah, the email is freethought, F-R-E-E-T-H-O-T, at America, it's the little A ampersand, AOL.com, America Online.
Okay, once again, freethought, F-R-E-E-T-H-O-T, at AOL.com. For the Freedom of Thought Foundation, either to contact them, to join, and or to get the new expanded researchers edition of Operation Mind Control by the gentleman that I've been interviewing this evening, Walter Bowart. Walter, it's been a pleasure. We're going to have to sign off now because we're off at 11 o'clock.
Okay, Dave.
But it is a thrill for me personally, as well as this has not only been an informing evening, but it also is a thrill for me personally to be able to speak to someone that was not only one of my academic inspirations, but also, frankly, one of my role models.
Well, listen, Dave, and you have been mine because I've quoted you in this latest book. Also, let's do this again where we can take phone calls.
Okay, we do have a conference calling capability, and we will definitely do that at a further at a future engagement.
Terrific. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Same to you.
Okie doke. Very good. Walter Bowart, author of Operation Mind Control and one of the founders of the Freedom of Thought Foundation, now a vehicle for escape and therapy for people who have been subjected to mind control.
Tape cassettes of Dave Emery's archive documentaries and weekly One Step Beyond programs are available from a tape duplication service. The service is Archives on Audio, and you can contact them at Post Office Box 170023, San Francisco, California, 94117-0023. The phone number is area code 415-346-1840. Once again, that's P.O. Box 170023, San Francisco, California, 94117-0023. The phone number and area code are 415-346-1840. A 12-page catalog listing and describing each archive show is available. Neither Dave Emery nor KFJC make money from the sale of the tapes.
Jonestown of the People's Temple was, in reality, a mass mind control experiment conducted by the CIA as a follow-up to something called MK Ultra. They had medical checkups for